Yeah, it's kind of cool. I think we got like 30 people in the chat already. I think Daigle's in there even. So that's
so one less person.
Yeah, 29. That's fair. Hey everybody, welcome. We did a little bit there. We're like we're taking the show on the road. We're gonna check your local listings, the James and Dan Show. Come into your local theater.
We love you, Adam.
We do love you, Adam. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. It is Friday, 4 p.m. Pacific. Heck, let's do some Pathfinder Friday. Today we've got we're doing another show that was suggested in the chat. And so Adam Daigle, you are people, buddy. We're kidding. We love you. We're doing a show that was suggested in the chat today. So we're going to be talking about Numeria. And I think that came up either last one or the one before.
I think it was last week in the chat.
And thought it was such a good idea that we just decided, yeah, heck, let's do it. And then also just to let you know, I've seen some questions coming up on our social media and stuff. We are continuing the Iconic series, but we're trying to do those once a month so they're not all front end loaded right away. So stay tuned for that. Those are coming soon. So yeah. So anyway, to do this, I'm just blowing through all of the introductions here to talk about this awesome wasteland of a place. We've got, as always, James in the house. James, thanks for coming.
Yeah.
We've got some cool images to show off. We've got some fun things to talk about. And yeah. So first off, how was your week?
Oh, it's busy. Still doing stuff.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep.
Steve, how are you? Welcome to the show, buddy. So let's talk about this. So this came up in the chat.
Yeah.
And I think that same thing as Magnamar. That's also where we got that from. So what we're gonna do is we had somebody in the chat say, hey, about Numeria, and we were like, oh, that's not a bad idea. And then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, oh, I'm really looking forward to this. Actually, this is going to be a lot of fun, because in the social media posts that I put out for the show, I basically was like, we're Starfinder meets Pathfinder. I mean, it is really, and it really hit home when I was putting the images in.
Yeah,
it's like, oh my gosh, that it is 100%. There's stuff coming directly across from Starfinder. Yeah. So to start, let's talk about how the whole idea of like the Iron Gods and all of this technology and all of that stuff. Where did that come from? What's the evolution of that?
So in the really early days of Pathfinder, we were sitting around trying to come up with ideas for what sort of regions we wanted to put in the setting. We knew that we wanted to have like standard fantasy with like elves and dwarves and giants and all that stuff. We knew we wanted to have somewhere that was like a pirate infested archipelago. We knew we wanted like a frozen Viking land. But we also wanted some of these other tropes that have been really popular through all sorts of video game stories, novels, movies.
Right.
And that is like mixing science fiction and fantasy together. That's something, I mean, one Conan stories, Robert E. Howard Conan stories had science and fantasy mixing together. Star Wars is coming out from the other direction. It's mostly science fiction, but there's certainly fantasy stuff going on. Going on. The whole Force element is very, religious and stuff like that.
One with nature.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like video games do it all the time, where this like what might magic and wizardry and all that have this fantasy setting where you find laser guns in the deepest dungeons and all that.
Right.
D&D has done this traditionally through all of most of their settings and so forth. We wanted one that had a mix of science and super science and fantasy in our setting. And by having all of these basically nations in Golarion kind of be self-contained, we could plop that in one region. And if somebody wasn't comfortable with it, because mixing science fiction in your games is really polarizing, you could just kind of pave over that nation, and just say that it's just unsettled or uncivilized or whatever. Nothing's going on there. I'm going to focus on the stuff surrounding it.
Right.
So that was really the initial idea for Numeria. I forget who came up with that name. It was Jason Bullman or Eric Mona. I think it was Eric. I'm not sure. It wasn't me. I didn't come up with that one.
Okay.
But once they started talking about it in those early days when I was working on Rise of the Rune Lords and starting to think about Curse of the Crimson Throne and what other adventure paths we want to do, I was like, I need to do an adventure path at some point set in this land.
Yeah,
and it's called Iron Gods. And I want it to be about what happens when you have faith and science, which in the real world are two things that just clash all the time. What happens if you combine them in a way that so that they work together.
And what roughly what year are we talking about here?
Oh, it's like 2007.
2007.
Yeah, it was like at the very start of doing, well, whenever because it's been years ago anyway, but this is at the start. I had like a spreadsheet of all of these Adventure Path titles and ideas that Wes Schneider and I were really curating and all that. And Wes had like, I think he was calling it Cadaver Crown or something like that. And it became Carrion Crown. I had Iron Gods. I had Wrath of the Righteous, not under that name, but like the World Wound Adventure, the Jade Regent one with Amico going across the top of the world. That was a very, very early one, and I set hints up for that in the very first adventure. So a lot of those are basically, they were ideas that we wanted to do, but we couldn't do one where, if we were too timid to do an adventure path where there was samurai and ninja in there, because that's stepping away from the traditional Eurocentric kind of fantasy tropes.
Right.
There was no way we were going to do one with like robots and lasers.
So then let me ask you this. So if this is 2007, this is way before there's even a thing called Starfinder. None of that even existed. But is there something in possibly, especially if it came from like Eric or Jason or you, if this evolution of this land came, are there kernels of Starfinder starting at that moment?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So when we started working on Iron Gods, one of the things that became apparent really, really right away was like, we are going to have lasers, we're going to have like flamethrowers, we're going to have spacesuits, we're going to have all of these things that the game needs. And we won't have room to put these into the adventure path because that's adventure. We didn't have room. So I was talking with Eric and the idea of the technology guide was born. And I was like, I can do this. I've had on my sideboard like this game that I've been working on for even longer than I've been working at Paizo. That's all about like mixing fantasy and science fiction set in a post-apocalyptic world where the Cthulhu, where the great old ones have taken over, and all it's like a mix of Fallout and the Dark Half and Road Warrior and Lovecraft and all this stuff. It's sort of my homebrew kind of side project game. And as part of that, I'd already made just mountains of technological items, all sorts of just gizmos and gadgets and tools and stuff like that. So we're always pressed for time here at Paizo, and I basically told Eric, is like, hey, I've got a bunch of the stuff already worked out. I can build this technology guide up super quickly. The toughest part is basically kind of filing off the flavor and giving it a Golarion spin. And so that was basically the technology guide. And that book came out, we got a picture of a fight, the cover of that book out there. And the idea there was we wanted to show kind of a science fiction fantasy type battle going on. So we took our iconic gunslinger and basically gave her a new suit of armor and some lasers and stuff like that. And then put her in a fight against the idea was like an ogre or a hill giant that has been cybernetically enhanced and all of that. So the cover just came out just so cool looking. There's a side story there about like if you change the costumes an Iconic is wearing, then they kind of don't look like the Iconic anymore.
Oh yeah, right.
So I don't know how many people realize that is our iconic gunslinger on the cover of that book, but
it is an amazing image though.
Yeah, it's really cool.
So cool.
So I basically put all of this stuff into the tech guide and rounded it out with like spells and archetypes and other types of things. But the bulk of that book is an equipment book with lasers and force fields and jetpacks and like zip sticks and all of these different types of gizmos and stuff that I basically imported, like the nuclear resonator and the toroidal vortex shotgun and just crazy stuff. Some of it got cut, but anyway. So that was the basis of all the technological items, and I built them as if they were magic items, because really when you get down to it, a stick that you poke somebody and it makes their wounds go away, whether that's like Wand of Cure Light Wounds or a nanite hypogun. Right. It's kind of uses the same basic rules. It's flavor that you can change it around.
Okay, so technology was magic.
Yeah, exactly.
Essentially. Okay.
And so all of that stuff got put in the tech guide, and then for the Iron Gods Adventure Path, we went back and we expanded every volume to add more stuff and used that as a really key resource to basically, give out treasure and stuff like that in the game. So that's Iron Gods. A couple years later, we start talking about Starfinder, and I wasn't involved in a lot of the Starfinder, the preamble, all that. That was James Sutter, Rob McCreary, Owen Stevens, a bunch of other guys. So they started building Starfinder as a science fantasy game, and we'd already kind of tread that ground a little bit from the fantasy side of things with Iron Gods and the tech guide. So they took a lot of the stuff in the tech guide, not all of it, but you'll see stuff like the DNA, if you will, has carried through, like the nanite hypoguns have carried through, and zero rifles, I think, are carried through. In my original one, there were ZK rifles, 0 Kelvin rifles.
Oh, okay.
But that was a case where it's like, I can't call them ZK rifles in Pathfinder because we don't use Kelvin as a temperature gauge in Pathfinder, so it wouldn't make any sense. So
yeah.
Anyway, so that's kind of the way that it went. But it also goes beyond that too, because it's more than technology in Numeria. There's aliens. That have come down from the stars as well. So back up a little bit to give a very brief
I'm not trying to rush you,
story
James.
about Numeria.
Okay.
It's basically where the Conans all lived long, long ago. It's this savage barbarian land. And then a spaceship from a very technological advanced society just crashes down onto it. And this is like an early sketch we got of the spaceship. And one of the ideas with these sketches, we put these on the inside covers of the Iron Guards Adventure Path. And it was like, we want to have like drawings that people from a fantasy setting would do, like on scrolls with parchment and like stuff like that, of technological objects. So that was kind of like a combo there.
Such a good combo.
Covered it over together. So anyway, the spaceship crashes, explodes, spews robots and nuclear radiation and waste and stuff all over the planet, all over Numeria. And then 9,000 years later is our setting. So these things have been seeped into the ground, and there are like these relics you can dig up and find stuff, and like barbarians are like, what's this button do? Click, nuclear bomb, stuff like that happens. And all of these fluids dripping out of these old crass spaceships are like engine oil and stuff like that, but they're like and then they grow like horns and they get all mutations and stuff like that. So
it's what could go wrong?
Nothing. Adventure happens when you drink the mutation drinks.
So then let me ask you this. So because it was a barbarian society, kind of a wasteland, did that help kind of contain what was going on?
Sort of. I mean, the idea we basically had, because we didn't want this stuff to go all over the planet. But it was like early on, a barbarian king pushed the button and set off a nuke, and the rest of the barbarians were like, this stuff's bad. Let's bury it over. And then for thousands of years, they ignored it. And it's only recently when like Pathfinders have started coming in here and exploring that this has been kind of rediscovered and all of that. But among all that other stuff, there's like menagerie ships and stuff like that, aliens and everything. And so we'd had this creature called the kasatha, which was put into Advanced Race Guide. And it was like, how are we going to fit these into a Golarion? We've never mentioned anything about them before in the history of the world. There's nothing there.
Right.
Obviously, they're aliens. So in Iron Gods, we have a fair amount of kasatha showing up. And this kasatha was Wayne Reynolds put that character on the cover, and it's again the combination of like has a laser rifle, but also has like a creepy like beast pelt type thing going on, right. And there's this combination of magic and science going on there, and there's also like we wanted to make sure we got robots in there as well, and so like there's a little bit of spoilers going on with this for the Iron Gods Adventure Path, but like there's the Iron God itself is a god made out of iron basically, so it's like what happens if robots become divine creatures, like what happens if robot God or robot Satan.
Right.
Spoiler, we don't do good guys. It's more of robot Satan. But
you never know. I mean,
So you got that sort of all of these different things you can start doing, like what happens with artificial intelligences and clones and holograms and things like that. It just opens up so many new stories you can tell.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when I was putting the images into the Stream Deck, the Kasatha was specifically the one that
Kasatha is a case of something that carried over from Pathfinder.
Yeah.
It was originally created as like proof of concept for the Advanced Race Guys. Like, we need to prove to you can use these rules to make somebody with 4 arms. The Kasatha. And then we're like, I don't know where they live in Golarion. They're aliens. They crashed here from Kasatha, whatever the planet was called.
Yeah.
And then Starfinder comes along and they're like, we need alien races. So they're going to make up a couple of new ones, but they're like, we want people to be familiar, so we're going to pick the Lashunta and the Kasatha and stuff like that.
It was a really good idea.
Androids are another great element.
Absolutely.
Like, that were originally a Pathfinder setting.
I think that, along with the Kasatha, how much of the Kasatha specifically was figured out here
very
that
relatively
carried across?
Not a lot. I mean, in this one, the Kasatha, where they were basically on a planet, and this spaceship came along and was like, we can give you a better life. And they plucked up a couple of them and put them in a habitat and all of that, and
It's like a
went on
claw
their way.
game.
And then the Kasatha homeworld, they like have stories like, remember eons ago, there was a light in the sky and our people vanished. They were the gods, whatever. So it's really these Kasatha that show up in Pathfinder. They don't remember their homeland. They don't really know what their story is and all that. We were very mysterious about a lot of that stuff. And it was really when they came into their own, I think, on Starfinder. There's all sorts of information about them now in Starfinder.
Yeah, it's really fun to look back and see, because I did a little bit of reading through some of the Iron God stuff and just kind of skimming through it. It's such.
It was. I mean, with Iron Gods, because I had the idea for the title. Like, it was the easiest one to name, because I'd come up with a name like 7 years, whatever years before I had to use it. But just coming up with titles for the individual adventure paths, you can use things that are like. I like coming up with titles that sort of evoke kind of ideas and themes and stuff like that. Hook Mountain Massacre is one of our most notorious ones we've ever done.
Yeah.
Because it's all these evil ogres, and they're violent and just horrible and all that.
I mean, it says it all in the title.
It does.
It's all right there.
But the idea there was that I wanted the previous adventure, Skinsaw Murders, to kind of evoke the British Hammer horror type thing, where it's like kind of the spooky haunted house type thing. So I went to Rich Pett to do that one, because he's over across the pond, and he can tap into that zeitgeist. And then for the next one, I went to Nick Logue, of course, which was kind of like strapping a flamethrower to a nuclear bomb. But and I told him, it's like, I've got the British answer to horror. I want Hook Mountain Massacre to be the American horror. You know, stuff like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Hills Have Eyes, those types of like kind of just really grisly, gritty horror.
Yeah.
So that's why Hook Mountain Massacre should evoke the title Texas Chainsaw Massacre or The Hills Have Eyes or those type of things. So going forward to Iron Gods, let us start naming things like pulling from like just the crazy kind of over the top 1940s, 50s science fiction movie titles. And that's where Valley of the Brain Collectors came from.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and that was one that I knew we had the right title, because at Gen Con, I was giving out the names of these adventure paths, and I had Valley of the Brain Collectors, and everybody started like clapping, and I was like, okay.
There it is.
I'm not wrong on that one. That's a pretty good title.
So let's do this. So really quick, a brief history. We already talked about how thousands of years ago, the ship comes down, barbarian land, harsh wasteland.
Yep.
Barbarians are kind of interacting with stuff, but not really knowing what they're doing.
Yep.
But because of that, it's kind of more secluded necessarily. Then the Pathfinder comes in. They document what's happening.
Yep.
And then what happens then? Is there, my guess, and I've not read the entire thing, but power struggle? I mean, there's got to be this
with Iron Gods in
for
particular.
Control, you know, like
with Iron Gods in particular.
Yeah, and just with the technology that's to be found in this area.
All right. So we had two kind of competing power struggles going on inside of Numeria. We've got the barbarians, who are, you know, the traditional, like I keep calling them the Conans, but it's basically what's inspired them. So we've got they're led by this guy Kevoth Cool, who is like addicted to all sorts of stuff, you know, like this Numerian fluids and stuff like that. Now on the other side, you've got the Technic League, who are that thing you just threw up. That's let me get distracted by this.
Yeah, I actually pushed the wrong button, but we'll leave it up.
Now that that's up there, it's like, what's more badass than an orc chieftain?
One with a chainsaw?
One with a chainsaw. So it's like, basically, I mean, this is a case where it's like, hey, Wayne, you do really good pictures. Do you want to do an orc fighting with a giant chainsaw? And he's like, oh, yeah, sure. But he knocked it out of the park on this one.
Yeah,
and
it's
it
so
really,
good.
This one is one of the ones that really synthesizes the classic fantasy, you know, the scary orc chieftain with a chainsaw.
Yeah, and that's the other thing too. I think that with the technology, like as a player,
right?
You know, kind of mentally with the technology up against like a chainsword, basically.
Yeah.
It automatically puts you at a disadvantage, because your character's used to facing magic and making saves and dealing with another sword or a crossbow or something. But now there's a chainsaw coming at you.
Yeah, it's like, well, not only are you like, I don't know how much damage this is going to do to me because I've never had a chainsaw in this game, but it's like, I've seen that movie. I don't want to go on the hook. It's also another thing that's really fun about this. It's not so much now that Starfinder's out and so well received and everything, but when I first, like, I would in many PaizoCons, I would run games of Unspeakable Futures, the post-apocalyptic game that I pulled a lot of this stuff from.
Right.
And it just sets up these fun little like moments. Like at one point, Jason Nelson, who runs Legendary Games, was in that game, and he was playing. I forget, it was like a scavenger or some thug, and he had a shotgun. No, he was playing a raider. And so like he jumps onto this truck and they're driving through the woodlands and all that. And he's like, I'm going to make a sneak attack with my shotgun. And the whole table kind of went, what? Because that's two things. Sneak attack always happens with swords and crossbows and bows and knives and stuff like that. But sneak attacking with a shotgun, just that sort of weird synthesis of like fantasy tropes and modern or future tropes is just... It's cool.
It is amazing.
Yeah. Like it wasn't so cool for the guy that got snuck attacked with a shotgun.
I think
but he was bad.
You know, if you're on the receiving end of that, I can see why that's not so awesome.
Yeah. But same thing. Snuck attack by a chainsaw.
If my rogue could sneak attack with a shotgun, done. I'd do it in a second. That'd be amazing.
You have to do it once, because once you shoot the shotgun, you're not sneaking.
You're not sneaking anymore.
But it's a shotgun and you're sneak attacking. You don't need more than one shot.
No, I think you're fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so really quick, because we are kind of coming up on time already.
Oh, what else? So we got to.
I want to talk about this skeleton fella.
So that's the same thing I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's like taking two genres and matching them together and being able to do things that you can't normally do. So this is something I knew I wanted to illustrate very early on in Iron Gods, and that was. A skeleton, an undead guy in a spacesuit.
Yes.
And he's going to attack you with a shard of glass that broke out of the helmet that he's wearing or something like that. And so that type of thing is just so cool. It's like, what really says science fiction and fantasy mashed together more than, you know, a skeleton in a spacesuit coming at you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that again, with something like this, that like it's like an undead space marine.
Yeah.
With things like this, like that image in particular.
Yeah.
The space skeleton.
Yeah.
Evokes things like the old comic Heavy Metal.
Yeah.
Where they would mix horror tropes with
that,
science fiction and really mash those things together. Yeah. Because I think in drawing, like in animation form, it's so much easier to push those things together effectively. You
can push them together, and you can get away with it better because it's like,
I think
since
you're
it's animated, it's already one step away from reality. But I mean, again, like I was started this out with talking about Star Wars. That element of mixing fantasy and science fiction, it's popular. It's super popular. People may not realize it is popular because, like with Star Wars, it's like, oh, that's science fiction. It's like, you peel away the layers, and
the more you get down to it, it's just really good storytelling tropes from different parts that come in, and I think that let's talk about this really quick before we run out of time.
Oh no,
I know, it's getting there. In Numeria, what and we've already established this. I think Lori was mentioning it earlier in the chat. Just about 90% of the stuff that we've been talking about, it's like, oh, that originally came from my homebrew that I already did, and blah blah blah. So a question like this is actually probably if this area sprang from the brains of like Mona or Jason Bowman, maybe this isn't something that you already have used before. But in this land, like in Numeria, if you're doing a homebrew, what are some of the things that you're like, oh, I'm definitely going to take the PCs. They have to see this, and they have to encounter this.
All right. So the number one thing would be Silver Mount. And that's basically this giant mountain made out of metal. And all of the barbarians are like, don't go there. That's where the bad things are. And what that is the main spaceship crash there. It's this capital ship. It's immense. And it's the place where you go in the last Iron Gods Adventure Path. Spoilers. And it's a mega dungeon, too.
Oh, wow.
So there's dozens of decks on this giant underground half-buried spaceship. And so that's a place, that's like the number one place to go to adventure. I mean, I think we did like 4 or 5 of the locations inside Silver Mount in the last adventure. But there's like 12 or 15 or 20. It's got a side view of that. There's all sorts of stuff you can go in there. There's this group called the Technic League, which is kind of like they're wizards who use science to their own ends and all of that. And so dealing with them would be a good thing to do. There's towns down to the south where they like are super afraid of technology, and if you like walk in with even like a broken laser gun hanging from your necklace and it's like, I like the shape, it's my trophy. They'll run you out of town or hang you or whatever.
They'll run you out on
They'll
a rail.
run out. There's the Feldales, I think they're called, to the west, which are like kind of just blasted, ruined badlands where you'll find like radioactive puddles and buried spaceships and robots, like giant scorpion robots and stuff like that.
Oh, gross.
Yeah, there's
That's disgusting.
In addition to the Iron Gods Adventure Path and the Technology Guide, we've also at the same point released a campaign setting about Numeria itself.
Okay.
So there's a lot of information out there about Numeria that people can do more stuff with.
So yeah, and that's how we're going to wrap this one up. People want to know more about Numeria.
Yeah. There's also novels. We've had a couple of novels set in Numeria, and
the Pathfinder Tales.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So and some of the characters in those tales end up playing roles in Iron God and all that. So yeah, just there's all sorts of stuff, and we did a lot of stuff with Numeria back on that point. So I think the best way to start would probably to start with Iron Gods, and then just kind of it'll spread from there, like space plague, I guess.
Like space waste.
Space waste.
Is like the radioactive. Was it radioactive? Is that what they were doing?
Yeah, I mean it's a combination of like some of it's radioactive, some of it's like pools of nanotech, some of it is like mutagens.
Oh, nice.
It's all of the slurry that comes out of science fiction things, like alien drool and like predator blood and
just the fun stuff.
Yeah, the stuff that gets you experience.
Stuff. Yeah, and that is true. That leads to experience.
Exactly.
So, all right. So how about we do a Q&A? You want to start some Q&A?
Yes.
All right. Let me do a goodbye to everybody, and then we'll start some Q&A. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you had a good time. I hope you learned a lot about Numeria and the Iron Gods and the clashing of the genesis of Starfinder and its roots in Pathfinder. I find that very fascinating, and I think that I would be surprised if we don't do another show about this at some point, because I think there's a lot there. So thank you so much for joining us. If you like the show, give us a like, and maybe in the comments tell us your favorite thing about the Iron Gods or Numeria, and let us know. We'd love to read it. If something good comes along, I'll make sure James sees it, and then we'll high five at how awesome your comment is. And in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend. For Paizo, for James, and for me, I'm your old buddy Dan. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next time. Bye.
See ya.